The layer AI is replacing, and what rises when it's gone. There is a number that should make you stop and think. In a landmark study published by Harvard Business School in collaboration with Boston Consulting Group, 758 professional consultants were given a set of realistic work tasks and split into two groups. One group used AI, one did not. The results were not subtle. For tasks within the AI frontier, participants with AI access completed tasks 25% faster, with performance rated over 40% higher by independent evaluators, and completed 12% more tasks overall. Those are not marginal gains. That is a category shift. And it happened inside one of the most credentialed, highest performing professional environments in the world. These were not low-skilled workers doing repetitive tasks. These were BCG consultants doing the kind of analytical, creative, strategic work that defines knowledge work at its peak. And AI made them dramatically better, faster, higher quality, more prolific. So here is the question that study raises, and that almost nobody's asking. If AI can boost a top-tier consultant's output by 40%, what exactly is it replacing? What was the work that was taking the time and producing the lower quality output before? And more importantly, when that work is gone, what rises in its place? That is what we are talking about today. Let's be precise about what I mean by the execution layer, because vagueness is the enemy of useful thinking here, and most conversations about AI and work are deeply vague. The execution layer is not the obvious stuff. It is not data entry, not scheduling, not the tasks we have known were automatable for decades. The execution layer runs much deeper than that. It is the first draft of almost anything. It is synthesizing a body of research into a coherent summary. It is translating a rough idea into structured prose. It is generating options, 10 versions of a headline, 5 approaches to a problem, 3 framings of an argument. It is the initial analysis of a data set, the opening moves of a legal brief, the first pass at a financial model, the background research before a client meeting, all of it, going. Now here's the nuance most people miss. When we say AI is doing these things, we do not mean AI is doing them instead of you. We mean AI is doing them before you. The first draft exists before you open a blank document. The research summary exists before you open a browser tab. The 10 options exist before you have thought of one. That changes the nature of your job, not by removing a task, but by relocating where your judgment enters the process. You have moved, whether you wanted to or not, from maker to editor, from producer to curator, from the person who generates the first version to the person who shapes, elevates, and decides. That is a fundamentally different skill set, and most people have not spent much time developing it because until now they never had to. Here is where it gets uncomfortable. And I want to stay here for a moment because this is the part almost nobody talks about honestly. The execution layer was not just where work happened, it was where learning happened. For most knowledge workers, the process of writing the first draft is how they figure out what they think. The act of doing the research is how they develop the judgment to evaluate research. The friction of generating options from scratch is how they develop taste about which options are good. You did not just produce things by executing, you developed expertise through the doing. The Harvard study actually touches on this in a finding that got far less attention than the productivity numbers. For tasks outside the AI frontier, problems that require genuine human judgment, contextual reasoning, or novel thinking, workers who relied on AI were actually more likely to make mistakes than those working without it. They called this the Jagged Technological Frontier, the uneven boundary where AI helps on some tasks and actively hurts on others, even within the same professional workflow. The people who fell into that trap were not careless. They were overconfident. They had seen AI perform brilliantly inside the frontier and assumed it would perform the same way outside it. They stopped distinguishing between tasks where AI was a powerful amplifier and tasks where AI was a confident generator of plausible-sounding nonsense. That distinction, knowing where the frontier is itself a skill. And it is one that requires you to maintain your own judgment rather than deferring to the machine. This is the trap that is already claiming people who consider themselves sophisticated AI users. Research from Worklytics in 2025 found that 75% of global knowledge workers now use AI tools regularly. But using a tool regularly and using it well are not the same thing. The people who are genuinely elevating are a much smaller subset, and what separates them is not how much they use AI. It is how deliberately they use it. Now let's talk about what actually rises when the execution layer is absorbed. Not the generic answer. Creativity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence. Those phrases have been repeated until they mean nothing. I want to be specific. Three things rise. The first is taste, not preference, not aesthetic opinion. Taste in the precise sense. The ability to recognize quality, to feel the gap between good and great, even when you cannot fully articulate why, to know when something is right for this context, this audience, this moment in time. Taste is built through exposure and practice in caring deeply about the difference for long enough that the distinction becomes instinct. AI can produce volume, it cannot produce taste, it can generate 100 options, and it genuinely cannot tell you which one is right for your specific situation. That judgment is yours, and it compounds over time in a way that no amount of AI usage can substitute for. The second is problem framing. This is the most underrated skill on this list, and I think it is the one that will define the next decade of knowledge work. AI is extraordinarily good at solving well-defined problems. You give it a clear question, a clear constraint, a clear objective, it performs impressively. But the hardest part of most real work is not solving the problem. It is figuring out what the problem actually is. Most problems that land on a professional's desk are not well defined. They are symptoms, surface manifestations of something deeper. Research across multiple fields, writing, customer support, software development, law, translation, consistently shows that AI's gains are concentrated in execution, with 15% to more than 50% reductions in task completion time. What the research does not show gains in is problem identification. The framing layer remains human territory. The third is judgment under genuine ambiguity. This means making consequential decisions when information is incomplete, stakes are real, and there is no clean right answer. AI can model the scenarios, it can lay out the considerations, but it cannot decide for you, and it cannot bear the consequences of the decision in a way that develops your judgment. That only happens through doing it yourself repeatedly with real stakes attached. Now here is something the research is starting to show that cuts against the most optimistic narratives. A study from Harvard's Digital Data Design Institute found that without AI, higher education participants outperformed lower education participants by more than half a standard deviation. With AI access, that gap fell to less than 15%, closing about 75% of the baseline performance difference. That sounds like great news, and in some ways it is. AI is a powerful equalizer at the execution layer. But here is the implication nobody wants to say out loud. If AI compresses the execution skill gap to near zero, then execution skill, the thing most people spent years developing, is no longer a meaningful differentiator. The floor has risen, which means the floor is no longer where the game is played. Research from Brynjolfsson, Chandar, and Chen in 2025 found that since the release of ChatGPT, early career workers aged 22 to 25 in the most AI-exposed occupations have experienced a 13% relative decline in employment. Senior workers in those same occupations, stable or growing. Because seniority, at its best, is not execution speed. It is accumulated judgment, pattern recognition, the ability to frame problems and make calls. The latter is not disappearing. It is being restructured. The bottom rungs are being removed. So what do you actually do with this? Three things. And I want to be practical rather than inspirational. The first is deliberate friction. Not all friction is waste. Some friction is where the learning lives. The practice of forming your own hypothesis before asking AI what it thinks. The practice of writing a rough version of something yourself before using AI to push it further. The practice of deeply interrogating AI output, not asking whether it is good, but asking why it is structured the way it is, what assumption it made, what it missed, where the reasoning has a gap. The second is developing your frontier map. The jagged frontier is real, and it is specific to your domain. The tasks where AI performs brilliantly in your field are different from the tasks where AI confidently produces plausible-sounding errors. Most people have not mapped this. The people who are getting the most out of these tools have a granular understanding of where the frontier sits in their specific work. The third is using AI to go further into complexity, not to avoid it. The passive AI user gets a good enough answer faster. The deliberate AI user asks harder questions than they could have asked before. They use the execution speed to spend more time in the genuinely difficult, genuinely human parts of the work. The execution layer is going. The question is what you are building in its place. Taste, framing, judgment. The skills that were always at the top of the ladder, that were always what separated the exceptional from the merely competent. The execution layer was the scaffolding, and scaffolding always comes down when the structure is built. The question is whether there is a structure underneath it. Subscribe and drop a comment below. What layer of your work do you think AI is already replacing? I will see you in the next one.